US President Joe Biden is pledging to slash greenhouse gas emissions in the world's largest economy. Speaking at a virtual summit on Earth Day, attended by about 40 heads of state, Biden reiterated US support for meeting globally agreed climate goals. The Biden administration wants to replace subsidies for fossil fuels with clean energy incentives. The new policies are aimed at halving emissions by 2030 compared to 2005 levels, and help the world's second worst polluter become carbon neutral by 2050.
The United States isn't waiting. We are resolving to take action. Not only our federal government, but our cities and our states all across our country, small businesses, large businesses, because scientists tell us that this is the decisive decade. This is the decade we must make decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis.
Well, let's get more on this now with Thomas Sterner in Gothenburg, Sweden. He's a professor of environmental economics at the University of Gothenburg. Welcome to the program, Professor. Can we start with the US President's announcement that it wants to cut emissions by just a little over 50% by the end of this decade? It does sound ambitious. What do you make of it? Can it achieve it, and how can it achieve that?
Well, this is fully achievable, and it's very heartening to see that now the three big players, the United States, China, and Europe, are all beginning to take serious commitments to do something about the climate.
Okay, now in terms of how we can achieve that, what does it need to look at in particular? Does it need to look at its electricity generation, its cars sector perhaps, or what sort of changes does the US need to make in order to achieve that goal?
We must understand changes are needed over the whole board. The United States is an economy which uses fossil fuel very intensely. Use in transport sector, in buildings, air conditioning, in industry, everywhere are very high. And so massive investments and massive efforts are needed everywhere. It's important to understand that this has to be done at a system level. So prices of fossil fuels need to rise. They need carbon taxes or tradable permit schemes in order to achieve these targets.
Now, we know under the former US President Donald Trump, he was a very big advocate of reopening coal mines, supporting fossil-fueled industries in the United States. How big or important is the fossil fuel industry in the United States right now? How does it compare to America's renewable sources of energy?
Well, it's still very important. It has been a dominant industry in the recent history of the United States. There are big resources of oil, natural gas, and coal. Coal mining is on the decline, but oil and gas are still increasing in the latest, let's say, decade. And so it's true that renewables, wind and solar, are growing faster, particularly in some states, but they are still small. So there is a lot of work to do, but this is good. It will also give employment, good, well-paying jobs, and be part of Biden's New Deal.
Can I ask you about China now? Because the world's second largest economy has for a while now overtaken the United States as the world's largest overall emitter of carbon, but on a per capita basis, the US is still number one. We heard from Chinese President Xi Jinping. He said that China is continuing to move towards sustainable sources of energy and that it is on track to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. What are your thoughts on his comments there? Are they ambitious enough for the world's largest carbon emitter?
Look, it's very hard to compare levels of ambition between countries because the US economy and the Chinese economy are so fundamentally different. It's really difficult. And of course, China is a larger emitter, but they also is 4 times more people than the United States. So it is hard to compare it for many reasons. And so I won't put myself in the position of being a judge and saying who is doing most. That's hopeless. But it's clear that both countries, with the new decision by Biden, both countries are actually making a serious effort to do something. It's not enough, but it's a big step in the right direction compared with the situation a few years ago.
We know there's obviously an environmental imperative to cutting carbon emissions, but what's the economic one? Why is it in a country's economic interests to really speed up this process of slashing its carbon emissions?
Well, look, the fundamental reason is that the consequences of global warming will be very severe and very long run and very irreversible if we have another decade or two of global emissions that do not fall fast. That is the fundamental reason. It is in humanity's interest.
Okay, Professor, I'm sorry, please continue.
No, I mean, that's the fundamental reason. Then of course, it would be, each country would be fine if other countries go ahead first and they can kind of follow on a little bit afterwards. But this is there is no time for that kind of game. I think we will soon see, we are beginning to see the formation of a coalition of countries. The two most important are China and the US, because together they have half the emissions. If they will be joined by Europe and perhaps by India, let's say, as a representative of the poor in the world, then this would be a very powerful force. And maybe a coalition like that could actually force others like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and still lots of other areas, but force them to fall in line and also start reducing. And we can solve this global problem, which really is a tremendously serious problem and a very long run one that we will be talking about the whole of this century.
Okay, Professor Thomas Sterner from the University of Gothenburg, thank you again for joining us on the program.